Awesome. Grandma. Hi, January. This is great. Can we start? Can we just roll? Let's do it. Oh, this is exciting. My name is Jared Callahan. Welcome, Portland Film Festival people. I'm so excited to bring these filmmakers to you, with you, and to talk about the art of documentary filmmaking. So I'll have them introduce themselves and basically a log line for the film that they have made. Hopefully you've seen it. And if you have not, this is the perfect commercial for you, because now you will know about the process of making a film and why you should watch and love and watch twice and tell everybody about the films they made. So they can both go. Cassidy will start us off, and then I'll be a panelist as well. The three of us will be bringing you the information and the experience that we have had about making films, these specifically, and then what else we're working on. So Cassidy, tell us about who you are and what film you brought to Portland.
Thanks, Jared. Hi, my name's Cassidy. I am the director and producer of Tipless, which is a feature documentary about the tip-free restaurant movement in the US. So a little bit about me before I kind of dive into the film. I am a graduate from San Francisco State University, went a very unconventional way of trying to get my degree, lived in lots of different cities, but eventually sort of got it. And when I was working through school, I was had an emphasis in narrative film and specifically comedy. So how I landed in documentary filmmaking is sort of an adventure, but that was sort of what I had spent a lot of time working on. But through college, I actually took a documentary writing course that really got me interested in the idea of documentary filmmaking and sort of the ethics behind it and what it means to represent real stories and real people. And I actually did a sort of paper documentary of this film for that class. And it was sort of the launching pad for what eventually became the feature of Tipless. It kind of got inspired to make it based on my experience in the restaurant industry. Spent about 10 years in and out of different restaurants, from fast food all the way to casual fine dining, trying to work my way through college and help support my art. And I learned a lot about the industry, sort of the ins and outs of what it is to work, and befriended a lot of the people I worked for. And one of the restaurants that I worked for decided to go tip free. It was actually in the Bay Area in Oakland. And I got to watch them make that transition and understand step by step why they chose to make this huge switch and how minimum wage was affecting all of that. And it was just such an interesting story to me. And I just found so many people who I would talk about it to outside of the restaurant industry, having kind of no idea what was going on in this little world of small independent restaurants, that it just inspired me to dedicate my life to making a film to share their stories and kind of start a conversation about restaurants and how to pay people more equitably.
That's fantastic. I'm realizing already, Trey, I'm gonna say this before you even go, is what you bring to this panel is what you get out of it. And if you're here just to pop in and see what a film festival does, great. But if you're here to be a student of doc filmmaking, you could be taking notes, because you could get 3 main points out of what Cassidy said already. And I'm so excited to ask follow-up questions. So we will definitely do a Q&A at the end of this. Our hope is to answer what you want to ask, and we can spend as much time as you are willing asking questions. And then also, I'm going to say it a couple times, is we've been making films for a couple years and some decades. And I think the thing that we would want to share by the end of this is, what is the stuff we wish we would have been taught? What's the film industry changes so often, and every project is different. And especially with docs, it's like every film is its own startup. You have to start a business from scratch. You have to do everything again for a new time. You have to curate a new audience. It's this big thing. And I just feel like there's so much that could be taught to us along the way. So that's our hope for you, is that you would get something out of this in that way. But Cassidy, that was awesome. I'm so excited. Trey, give us the who you are, what you made, and go into it. We're here for it.
Sure. Nice to meet everybody. Thanks for coming. So my name is Trey Nelson. I made a documentary called The Fifth Man, which is about a Long Island track and cross country coach. And, I think when people hear the sort of the pitch for this film, they go, why should I watch a documentary about a Long Island track coach? Well, I was sort of in the same boat. I was actually a hired gun for this documentary. I've been working in this industry for over 20 years, and a lot of the work that I do isn't sort of self-generated. It's generated by other relationships and things like that. So this documentary I started working on in 2019, September 11th of 2019. And we thought it was going to be a short. And then, the circumstances of what happened in 2020 really changed everything about the documentary. The participants' perspective on the world that they were living in changed. The way they wanted to maybe mend bridges and reconnect with people changed. And I think that a big lesson for anybody that's thinking about making a documentary, they've got to think about, Cassidy was talking about ethics of filmmaking. I think that's a big part of documentary filmmaking. But I also think a big part of documentary filmmaking is you have to ask your question, what kind of documentary am I making? And how is my participation in the filmmaking of the documentary going to change me? And how's it going to change the people's lives? Because you take on a pretty heavy responsibility for that. And I took my participation in this documentary very seriously. And, it's funny, I was talking to a friend who's a documentarian yesterday. He's got a great film. He made his name's Keith Maitland. He made Tower. I don't know if people saw that a couple of years ago. And he also made Dear Mr. Brody, which are two beautiful documentaries that just came out this year. And we were talking about how can documentaries be autobiographical? Is that even possible? Like, I think that every film is autobiographical. There's a part of you in every single film. And as I started making this film, I realized that it's a story of coming home. And in many ways, it was a story of me coming home as well. So that's all I've got to say.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I'm excited to bring a third perspective, and we'll just start bouncing some of these ideas around all of us. My name's Jared Callahan. I got into I got into filmmaking by making skateboard movies in high school. And so we got to skate spots where I just wasn't good enough to skate, but I could hold a camera. So I made my way into filmmaking that way, studied media communication and production in college, started making films on the side with friends for like 10 years while I worked other jobs. And then I just kept getting drawn to it. So I filmed a feature documentary about a 90-year-old woman that writes and directs original community theater for her small town. So that was my first doc. It's quirky and it's fun, but by the end of it, you're like really rooting for them to pull it off. And I fell in love with people. I just spent a lot of time in a town of 3,000 people that's kind of on a river here in California. And it feels like the 1950s Midwest. It's just untouched by time. They still all shop at one store. They eat at one restaurant. And it was fantastic. And I just fell in love with this story that even if you wrote it as a script, I think you'd have people say, well, this is unbelievable. Or, I don't go there. But when you have people sharing their lives to you on camera, then you can really follow the flow of truth and vulnerability, and a genuine performance is maybe the wrong word, but it's also not, because they know they're being filmed. None of us were making investigative documentaries during this where there were hidden cameras and we're trying to do the best version of truth where they didn't know it. We're just saying like, this is an agreement. And I think relationship is big. We'll talk about this. Like, what's the relationship I've got with you as a filmmaker subject? I mean, we'll jump there. So this film is not that one. That was my first. This is called Clean Slate. And it's a feature documentary following two men as they live in a residential recovery program in the American South in Georgia. And they are filmmakers. So they're there trying to get sober and stay clean from hard drugs and get their lives together while they think that it will be important to make a short film about the trauma in their lives. So when I was working with them and mentoring some of the guys in the program, I realized what they were going to do and saw the doc story in it. And maybe that we could talk about finding a doc story will be one too, probably, is how do you narrow down of all the ideas you have or what you could work on? And I just saw it and just thought, oh man, these guys are going to try and make a short story. And you're filmmakers, it's so difficult to make a film. Every film, even a bad film, is a miracle because it's so much work. And I just thought, if they make something that's good for them, but they're going to make something that's tough and hard and maybe not good. So we doubled down. We hired a small group of doc filmmakers and some interns. We followed them for the summer of 2016. And we shot a 2-day short film that was just, you got to see the movie. Cassidy saw it. It was brutal. It was brutal. So that's our lives with this film. I guess my first question then for all of you, and I'll go last on all these, is then relationship, right? So Cassidy's, your story is very different than Trey's on this subject alone. Is you were writing from your own autobiographical, this is relevant to my life, I've lived this. And then Trey, I'm gonna ask you about taking projects for hire, and paying a mortgage and eating food and living indoors is important. And you're qualified at a point where you could take many jobs. So how do you decide what and why and where? So let's talk about relationships in doc filmmaking. The relationship is different in some ways than making a narrative film with actors. Cassidy, how did relationship play into this film with you?
Well, I think for me it was huge, because this is my first documentary, but it's also my first feature. So I didn't have a lot of clout or name recognition in sort of someone knowing me or being able to show them a previous work that could prove to them I could make a film. So to get people to agree to be on camera and be willing to participate, like, it took a lot of relationship building. And, honestly, the relationship that I had with the restaurant that we featured heavily was huge. If they hadn't agreed to be in it, I probably wouldn't have done it. And they were just so great people. I worked for them for several years, and they were just always so willing to say, whatever you need to do to help you and where you want to go, we'll do it. And so when I asked them, hey, would you be in a documentary? Absolutely, whatever. So that was just wonderful. And, that's something that I had built before even thinking I was going to do a documentary. But I had started out wanting to just do sort of this observational film, focusing on one restaurant, going through a year of what it looks like to go through sort of this tip-free system. And it got away from me. It became way bigger than I thought. We ended up getting several restaurants to be a part of it, including Amanda Cohen, who was on Iron Chef Canada. She owns a restaurant in New York that does vegetables. And I was able to get connected to her through actually another connection that I made, trying to just get advice and get information about restaurant activism and sort of what people were doing. And she was so gracious, and I loved her perspective, not only for her restaurant, but her reasoning to go tip free. And so there was so much I had to do about, building relationships and building trust to let me tell these restaurants' story. And it was, I took a lot of weight on it too, because the way that we approached it and sort of the way that the tip-free movement came about had a lot to do with minimum wage and the politics behind that. And anytime you touch politics, it's very tricky. And so these restaurants were trusting me to tell a story that wasn't going to end up hurting their businesses. And I took that responsibility very heavily, and just wanted to make sure, like, I was doing nothing to hurt the livelihoods of their business, but also the people that they employed. So there was a lot of finagling and, building that trust.
Oh, you said it so well. It became something bigger than we thought it would be. I feel like that's the story for so many film projects that we are in, especially like Trey just said too. Same, I thought it was going to be this, and it became this, which was much bigger. I guess we'll keep pulling nuggets out of what each other say for people too, just so it's good stuff gets said again. But I think a great lesson that we've learned about directing, or I've learned about directing, and you said it, is that you're always directing. That you are relational, and that your relationship with subjects doesn't end. So you can't be a jerk when the camera's not rolling, and then all of a sudden when you're rolling, turn on some sweet personality that gets a performance or a response or a story from them that is really personable, because you're always personable. People are smarter than that. And so you did it. You had skin in the game, you lived it. And therefore, when you bring that authenticity to the project, they can return with honesty and their livelihoods on screen with you and feel safe. So I love that you, like, even at the beginning with no, we're not famous, we don't have 100,000 Twitter followers, that you brought something that caused people to bring their something too. And I think that's really special.
Well, and yeah, and I had just one last thing, and I had originally not intended to put myself into the film. I did not want to do that, but I ended up deciding to do that. I talked with my editor a lot about it, but we ended up deciding to do that. One, because we thought it would enhance the story, since I had such a close connection to the whole movement, but it also became this sort of how do I want to say it? Sort of that skin in the game for me, where it's like, I'm going to put my face on this too. And so I'm not hiding behind a camera. Like, I'm also putting my face on be
Oh, maybe we lost Cassidy. She'll pop back up and say everything really fast in a paragraph. When she realizes
that.
it. Oh,
Oh,
there you go. Yeah,
am I back?
Yeah, the last bit cut out. Do you have that last sentence again, or?
Just I think it was something like just that skin in the game, so that I was also, on the face of it, and they, we were in the same position of having that same responsibility of putting our face on something bigger than ourselves.
Yes, and doc ethics, you touch on it, Trey. You can go there with relationships and then the ethics of what you're doing. There is something about putting your face in a project and about saying, I'm here with you. This is the style of this film. But then also, you took a project where someone paid you and you went discovering it as well. And that's a different perspective to take on a story. So can you tell us a little bit about now spending decades in the career and having a voice? How do you decide what to do, why to do, when to do, and how do you build relationships? How many irons in a fire do you have going at once? Are you always working on 5 projects, or?
Yeah, no. I when it comes to featured docs, I really only try to focus on one at a time. I would say, like, it's taken me I started out in 2001 working in the industry, worked as a PA in New York for many years. I lived in New York for 16 years. And kind of just worked my way up in television, commercials. I've done everything. And I would say that actually, like, an orderly evolution to becoming a storyteller, I think is really important. Like, you got to take those steps, and nobody has one path in this industry. And I think trying to either mirror somebody else's path, you're going to end up getting lost. I think you have to really figure out, as a human being, kind of like what kind of growth you want to have. You have to figure out what it means to be an artist. And I think that, for me, for many, many years, the projects that I worked on were very transactional. It's like, give me this, I'll do this. And then I had some changes just in my life. You mentioned, Jared, that you made a film about drug addiction. I'm in recovery myself from alcohol. So, that changed, like, once I sort of, like, stopped drinking, that changed my process as an artist. It changed my relationship with myself. And once you change your relationship with yourself, your art's going to change with it. So I would say that this film in particular, I made a feature film with a big star. I made a feature film with Josh Duhamel 4 years ago. And I make narrative stuff. I make commercials. I make documentaries. I make television shows. But I will say that the films that are the most important to me are the ones that, where you're emotionally committed to the characters, you're emotionally committed to their development in the story. And in order to do that, you've got to be a friend. Like you said, you can't wear a mask when you're making documentaries. You've got to be yourself. And the biggest challenge for me was, like, most of the interviews I did on this film, I did remotely. So I had to actually hire a crew, bring them to each location, and do the interviews over Zoom like this. But before that, I had to spend weeks and weeks and weeks talking to people and developing that relationship. And anyways, I'm just extremely proud of the work, and I'm proud of the relationships I still have with these people. I don't know if there's anything else I could say.
No, that's brilliant. Let's talk a little bit about troubleshooting and hurdles, because I think COVID and coming out of a pandemic has really challenged everybody's filmmaking process. I'm so encouraged to hear that you could see the way the world was and to safely move forward with a film that in the end tells something transformative and important that you weren't in the room for. The interviews is so cool. And I'm starting to hear more and more of these stories, how people persevered. So I guess the question would be, it could be pandemic related or not for everybody, but in doc filmmaking, troubleshooting, how much of doc filmmaking for you is on the fly, problem solving, troubleshooting? How much of documentary is contingent on your ability to pivot well and to make decisions on the fly when things go poorly? Cassidy, she's already laughing. So great. Yeah.
I think it depends on how much pre-production you've done, in a sense. in my story, it was a little bit different because I wasn't following something on the fly that I didn't know how it would end. I was recapping stories that had already happened. And so it was easier for me to get my head around, oh, okay, what shots do I need? What do I need to get as far as sound bites? But, you know, there is always a element of documentary filmmaking that you got to be on your toes because you're capturing live moments. It's, I mean, you can, I guess, redo things or stage things, but a lot of the best moments you get are just raw and real and in the moment. And so there's always that moment you see something, you're like, oh, I got to get that. And you miss it. And you're just heartbroken because it would have been perfect. But, you know, I think you just stay in the moment and try your best to kind of really intuit what's the best for the whole shooting process.
That's so true. How many times you've made something and then something happens and you go, well, could you just redo it? And it's like, oh, that's not the film we're making. You can't just stage people and wait 10 minutes for the sunlight to perfectly come through the window, which makes me feel like both of your trailers, when you watch a movie that has craft or has intention behind it, it really speaks to the artistry that happens on the fly and how much you have to be able to react and stay calm and not be like reactionary, but be able to respond to something that's happening, I think is really important. Trey, for you, things that you've seen, or for you making this film in particular, troubleshooting, how did that play into doc filmmaking for you?
Yeah, I mean, COVID totally threw our plan into disarray. I paused. I shot the first set of in-person interviews in October of 2019, second in February, and then everything happened. So we had to really adapt. But I would say, like, I've made verite documentaries, like really follow documentaries before. And I think one thing that I've learned over the years, in fact, I was at a festival in July and DP came to me and said, so how do you block and stage when you're covering something and you feel like you're missing it because you can't shoot everything. You just can't. And I think like the healthiest mental approach to it is if you don't shoot it, it doesn't exist. So you can't have regrets about something that you didn't capture. And trying to like sort of recreate that moment can do more damage to your documentary and your subjects and to your credibility than just sort of accepting that it doesn't exist. And I think that's also like, you have to do a lot of work on yourself as a documentarian. You really do. Like, you can't come to these documentaries having to like work out your own stuff in the documentary. You've got to be able to do the work before you come to the project with like clear-eyed intention, because these are people's lives. They're taking a lot of faith in you to tell their story. And I think that if you get in the way of your narrative, and when I say get in the way, if your ego gets in the way, or if anything kind of gets in the way, you could damage your documentary, you could damage the people. So you got to be really mindful of that kind of stuff. Yeah, and I also think like there's something really magical about documentaries as opposed to like, there's also something magical about narrative filmmaking too. There's always, if you're open to it, and it's a really hard thing to do because as a director, you want to control a lot because you feel that you know that you have a vision and you've got to articulate that vision and you've got to assert control. But really, I think it's the opposite. It's like Aikido. You've got to take somebody else's weight and throw it the other direction. And I really think that you have to create space and oxygen on a set, space and oxygen in an interview, so that you're exposing people to randomness, because it's in the randomness is where the magic exists. And I think that creating a really healthy environment on set or in an interview space is essential to getting to the truth of filmmaking.
Oh, that's so good. I've been taking notes on what both of you say, so I'm learning as well from this. I love it. For me, troubleshooting it's how you said a good thing, Trey, about being a director and about wanting to be like the captain of a ship. And there's this illusion of like, well, I'm the artist and I'm going to make this thing into a thing. And I just think that in order to get a truthful sharing of a story, the best thing that we've done is be on a journey with people. And I think that once if you've done your research and homework, Cassidy said, if you've done your therapy, be in therapy. If you haven't been in therapy, go to therapy and start, because we've all got stuff that's buried on different levels that we need to be working out in healthy groups. And you can do therapy, you can be in community, you can have good partnership, just be with people who will journey with you. Trey, you shared very vulnerably about being in recovery. I've now spent some time in those worlds, and it is raw. And it can be real. And there are people in seasons of your life too, where you hide and you like hide the deep stuff, and you just, it's hurt, but you still show. And sometimes where you don't show. And then other times you come and you bare your soul before people. So if you can in any way create a tone around yourself and in the environment of your filming, that you're not high stressed, you're not high fluty and fancy spending money, that you're just a genuine buying people coffee and talking about life, that it ends up creating a tone, in at least in one style of documentary, because there's all different styles, but in the styles of film that these three films kind of a place where we all relate is something that's real, that's people pouring out their lives and their stories, and in that there creates some sort of transformation for a viewer. So that's my next question. I'm going to send this note out to you. If you're watching this and you're live and you want to put a question in the chat, and you're allowed to do that, go ahead and do that. That'd be great. We have someone who will read those and send them on to us. So put a question in the chat if you want us to. We're going to get to them very soon. But my question then here would be about the ethics. You mentioned it earlier, Trey. Making a film, especially a doc, influences things. Things change, and some people make them specifically for the reason to change, and some are posting a verite portrait of something. But in doing so, like you said with Tipless, Cassidy, we're making a comment about money, about politics, about behaviors, about things. It's kind of judgments, right and wrong and not. So Cassie, we'll start with you. As you make a film, what are the ethics for you that you hold as a documentary filmmaker in this situation? And how did you approach knowing that what you were going to make was going to affect your life, viewers' lives, subjects' lives?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one piece of sort of advice or knowledge I got from my professor who did the documentary writing course, when he sort of introduced the topic, he talked about the way audiences watch documentaries. And he says often it's like they're putting on their documentary glasses and they're saying everything I'm consuming is true and everything I'm hearing is facts. But what we have to understand is there's someone behind the camera making choices about everything you're seeing. And that has huge implications in the way that we can make people feel and the way we can make people see things. And I think for me, that was just, it always stuck with me, even in sort of my narrative filmmaking. Because like Trey was saying, I think that filmmaking, more than the messages that it sends, it often says more about the filmmaker and the people behind it than it does the film itself. And there's this beautiful world that lives within that. And so for me, I had to really wrestle with that fact of like, okay, how do we create something where we're able to represent people as they are, let them say what they want to say, hear both sides of the argument, tipping, not tipping, minimum wage, for and against, and find ways to find something that represents well what is actually happening in the world, but also holds to these individuals' personal feelings and perspectives. And that takes a lot of nuance and questioning and figuring out, okay, what do we cut? What do we keep? And how do we weave that together to create something that is full? And how do I stop myself from putting my ideas too fully into it and creating something that is akin to propaganda or something that's not true? It's a lot of self-work. And I think there's something about having a really good team around you who can check you and work together and build off of each other to pursue those things, because it's easy to get caught in sort of your own world. You need those other perspectives to sort of hear and grow and be able to represent something more fully.
You said that so well. I even heard you say, this is tangentially, but how do you be a conversation and not a commercial? Because like you're bringing an open-handedness that leads you to this complex, dynamic, deep subject. And instead of just saying, hey, this is what I think about it, you're saying, no, let's be in a conversation. And I think in the end, asking your audience to ask a couple questions of themselves in their lives is much more impactful than saying, apply these 2 bumper stickers to your car, you know? And I just think that you end up making something that, dare we say, is art, like in the film that you're making around these topics. That's so good. Trey, same for you, ethics in what you choose to work on, knowing that it changes the world in a way.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think there's a certain amount of, like, I struggle with this because I think, yes, there's definitely ethics in filmmaking, but also you have, as a filmmaker, you also have a responsibility to the people, but you also have a responsibility to the actual film, right? Like you have a responsibility to the narrative. So for me, I think the things that I struggle most with as a documentarian is sort of playing with the edges of my ethics, but also playing with the edges of my fear, because I worry. I'm a deeply empathetic person, and just because that's just the way that my DNA is shaped and formed, and I worry about how it's affecting people. At the same time, I also have a lot of faith in the creative process and how it can help people too. So what I end up working with in my filmmaking in particular is how far can I push my own fear, right? Like how far can I push the envelope? And when I say fear, I'm not like how uncomfortable can I get in my conversations with people? How far can I push it before I lose them? And a lot of that has to do in my interviewing. Like I'm not a big verite documentarian. I haven't done a lot of that work other than in television. A lot of the work and a lot of the narrative for me comes in sitting down and doing interviews for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours with people. So it's like a therapy session for both of us. So we're just like working through stuff. So the ethics are finding what my boundaries are and questioning and pushing those boundaries with the people that I'm interviewing. And if they don't feel comfortable, they'll just shut it down. But generally, most of the time, it's a really honest give and take conversation. That's really my process.
I'm so glad you mentioned fear, because I think as humans that comes into us whether or not we give it that label. And to name that up front and know that part of the process of making a movie should take you there yourself, I think it makes you really empathetic as a filmmaker, because often so many people have that bubbling up in them as they're a subject. One of the best things I heard, I was speaking on a panel, and another filmmaker named Theo Anthony, who made the film, I think Rats got really popular. If you haven't seen it, it's a really weird verite film about rats in New York City. It's crazy. But he said a thing that I realized I've been living into, but I didn't know it. But he said, my goal as a documentarian is to show a side of a subject that they would be most proud of. What's the core of them that they're most proud of their identity. And instead of showing what I think of them to the world, I want to show what they think of them to the world. And I thought that was so interesting as a way, because we're so naturally inserting ourselves, that from his viewpoint is going to be naturally trying to take himself out of it to try and have the most pure connection between a subject and a viewer as possible. Keeping in mind, ethically, he's not ever really removing himself. He edited it. We crafted the score. Like, we influence things. And we're going to get to that in some of the practices that we talk about, the art of making the film. But for me, it was really great as I was working on an intimate short doc about someone who is sharing something kind of personal. It was like, oh, it's not what I think about this 18-year-old kid and what they think about this subject. It's what will you think when you watch this later in life? You may disagree with yourself, but will you know that you were honest, that you were true, that you told your truth at that time to this crowd. And it was great because we showed this film, like the first like home screening night was like 80 people in a small theater. There was half of them were her friends and families, and they all leaned very distinctly on one side of the political aisle. And the other half of the people were film festival people who were there that were all on the other half mostly. And we watched this movie and I realized what was happening when it was a part of a shorts block. And afterwards we talked about it and everybody was challenged and excited. The people who were seen, the parents of her, said, oh, you loved our daughter. Thank you. You saw us. And they were saying some things that not everybody, I don't agree with what they said. But then the film festival people came up and I thought they were going to blast me for giving voice to something we disagree with, and said, I've never saw someone through a lens that was so, and it was like, oh, that was just their own lens. You saw someone through their own empathy of themselves. And I think that's a real gift of documentary film. It's kind of like this time machine teleportation special, that we get to maybe offer to people as they press play on a streaming documentary. So the questions are still open. I'm going to start by asking you guys some questions on these, and then I'll jump in at the end. The goal of this next section is kind of to do like get into the nitty gritty, right? If someone's in this and they don't care about docs, they're going to turn it off anyway. So let's get into the weeds on some of these topics of what's the stuff that you wish you knew now, what's the stuff you wish you were told, what's something you learned on this film, and you can be specific with examples and don't be afraid to talk. So I'm going to ask you some nitty gritty. What's the best lesson you learned on? And let's start with, we'll kind of go in order-ish, but let's start with pre-production. What's the best lesson you've learned about, or a key lesson you've learned about documentary pre-production? Trey, we'll start with you this time and then go to Cassidy, and you can bounce off each other and whatnot, but what do you think?
That's a good question. I think for me, pre-production is about research. I really think that's the most important thing is if you have subjects that have written a book, read that book, take notes on that book, do as much work that you can in seeing that individual in 360 degrees. And then, I like to try to find sort of like the hidden doors inside people and the hidden rooms inside people. And I think that research really helps me figure out the hidden rooms inside individuals. I deal a lot with trying to help people, and this could be autobiographical in nature. I think it really is, but I really try to help people deal with pain and, in documentaries, because I think that it's dramatic, but I also think it can be transformative. So again, prep, do the work. Narrative is a totally different monster. Prep is everything in narrative. Like it's, if you're here because you want to learn about documentaries, but you've done prep and narrative, or you've made narrative films before, prep is even crazier in narrative, I think, because it allows you to expose yourself to randomness. And I would say in documentaries, the biggest thing is once you've done your prep, you either have to have I think this mantra is really important, is you're either going to have to change during the process or you're going to fail. If you're rigid and you're like, this is the story that I'm going after, I have no sense of discovery, you're not going to have a movie. I think that's really important.
Wow. This is a podcast right now. I wrote down change or fail, prep is important or you die, how to deal with pain, and hidden rooms inside people. So if you needed a masterclass, you just walked into it. This is fantastic. Cassidy, what about you? You mentioned doc writing. I think that's important. Can you explain that class a little bit to people that maybe haven't taken or don't know what that is? And then what's the best lesson that you've learned about prep?
Yeah. So in the doc writing course, we kind of learned a lot about pre-production of like what you would need as far as a documentary. We also learned about documentary scripting, where I think a lot of people go into documentaries thinking like, oh, I'm just going to shoot, then we figure it out at the end. It's a good idea to have some sense of a story or what you think it's going or where it could go, just to give you some anchor points to look at. There's obviously a huge level of flexibility that needs to happen within documentary, or again, it just doesn't work. But yeah, if you have some of that structure, it can give you some focus as, some parameters as you're wading through sort of the wildness of documentary. And we did a little bit about grant writing as well, just how to get funding and write grants for documentaries. So it was all very helpful. I think for me, the biggest thing that I kind of learned for the pre-production is just the budgeting and learning different ways to see the budget. Like obviously a budget's important to know, what you're getting into, how much it's really going to cost, and what you can afford. But I think for me, what would have been really helpful is to kind of not take it as this whole thing, but be more conscious of, okay, this is the budget of what I need for this part, and breaking it up into smaller sections. It's like, okay, so we have to do this part, get this funded, and then keep moving. And with documentary, it's kind of hard. It's not always a strict timeline, like a narrative film. Sometimes it becomes way bigger than you think, and all of a sudden you're flying somewhere else, you're getting an interview here, you have to kind of be on your toes. So it's nice to kind of have a certain sense of like, okay, this is what I need to focus on here, and funding. And I funded this film myself. I did do a little bit of crowdfunding, which would have also been helpful to kind of know. And I think crowdfunding, I learned a lot doing it. I don't know if I'd say I was super successful at it, but I learned a lot doing it. But I think if I had tried doing it more in smaller batches and more focused, it could have been a lot easier in sort of the process of tackling that, instead of trying to get some big lump sum of something.
Cassie, I'm so glad you took us there. You could sit in a full hour and a half just about funding a documentary. So we're not going to try and solve everything for everybody, but can you both answer to, as personally or not as you want, funding? How did you find it? What are ways that you can find it? Do you have any tricks or tips, best lesson you've learned about how to fund a documentary?
Get lucky.
Yeah.
It really, a lot of it has to do with luck. And I think luck is, can be a 4-letter word that a lot of people roll their eyes at in this industry. But I'll be honest with you, I have been doing this for 20 years. Okay. I have done everything in this industry. The people who stay in film, television, documentaries are the ones that can't do anything else. They can't possibly do anything else. Like, they find a way to tell the story, because if they don't tell the story, they can't live. They can't survive. And I know that sounds like a really dramatic way of looking at it, but if you're an artist, it's not like you can be something else. That's who you are. You're an artist. Okay. I identify as an artist. So yeah, funding. I think funding and money and abundance comes with being really open about your needs with people, not trying to hide, we could do it for X amount of dollars when you know that you can't. Be really open with people about what your needs are and what you think you can make this film for. And I think they'll appreciate the honesty, because I think anybody who's investing in film is a little weary of it, because there's been a lot of middle men in the industry who have given the industry, especially independent film, a bad name. And I think that it's our responsibility as filmmakers to be honest and trustworthy with those financiers as well. Otherwise, they're not going to come back. So we've got to be open and honest about everything that we're doing. And also, you have to know who your audience is in financing. Okay. Why are they investing? What is their connection to the content? What is their connection to you? That's really, really, really important. Are they investing because, last year they invested in the stock market and it was too impersonal? There are a lot of people out there like that. They want to have an experience with you. They want to change their lives, just like the people in the documentaries. So know who your audience is, I think, in financing is really, really important.
Oh, that's fantastic. Cassie, you want to add into funding at all?
Well, yeah, if I'm honest, I don't know really about the financing. I'm still so new to documentary filmmaking and filmmaking in general. That whole finance world is still something I'm learning. I think for myself, I plan to finance this film mostly through my own contributions. One, because it was my first film and I saw it as an investment in myself and what showing I could do something, and, maybe someone would pay me to do something later. Two, I didn't want to, I wanted control of the story because I just felt it was so sensitive. I didn't want someone coming in and forcing me to tell something that I didn't think was true. And so I really wanted to be wary about where I got my money. So I did do some crowdfunding and we did do some fundraisers. And a lot of it was from family, friends, people who want to support artists. And there's something really amazing about that, where if someone believes in your story and believes in you, they're willing to help you and invest without even getting anything in return from it, except seeing you thrive. And so that's something I would say for, people just starting out. Don't minimize what your family and friends might be able to do to help you in your career, but follow through and make sure that you're using their money wisely and making something that everybody can be proud of.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'll pitch into this one because there's a lot on film funding, but believe in the film that you're going to make, sell yourself. Trey said it really well. Know what people are getting into, right? If people are looking for like a no-brainer 6% return on their thing, film financing is not for you. Like if don't take money from people that couldn't afford to lose the money. Don't take money from people where their investment in you breaks them if you take their money. Find a rich family member, find a rich dentist. Like that's someone told us once, when you get to that level, do you want to own a politician or make a movie? And as soon as you start thinking that way about who has that much money that can make movies that pay everybody well to have food and benefits and eat and live indoors and make their movie, it costs money. It's like the cost will add up, and you can make something through grit and sweat and favors. But like Trey and I, as soon as you spend some time in the industry, you're going to be like, yeah, but we also have to pay people fair day rates. And that adds up as soon as you do camera and sound and score and color and festivals and lawyer, and it's like sound mix and design and and poster design and trailer design, and you're at a budget now, right? So I think the things that I could say for funding and for filmmaking is no's. Filmmaking is getting told no over and 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 over again. You will get rejected all the time. And you have to believe in your story enough that you're willing to be told no and see the world differently and move on and not sweat it for days and move right to the next email, phone call thing. I think you got to know what you're offering. I think people want to change the world. And I think that film does that in small ways. And so you cannot promise people Blair Witch Project numbers because we keep telling ourselves these famous Sundance sales stories, and they just don't happen like that anymore. DVD sales don't prop up $5-10 million movies, which is why these movies were getting made. So you have to be aware of what you're doing to know why you can sell someone. Basically, a film is an educated lotto ticket. It's not blind punching in numbers that just go into a pool, but in a lot of ways, you don't control what you do and what you make. We made a movie that's heavy recovery, mental health. And we've been told by distributors right now, we're like negotiating with people. They say, well, coming out of the pandemic, we're only really looking into buying romance and escapism and fantasy. So nobody wants to deal with death or suffering or heartache. And you're like, okay, so I worked for 5 years on a movie, but because of the pandemic, nobody wants to watch it. No, I think it works. It's just, that's a no from you, and you're not going to buy my movie. And my last thing on funding and filmmaking there, I think, is productive procrastination. I've never heard anybody talk about this, but I think it's something that really works for me. Is I've got enough projects going that even when I'm hitting no's or a roadblock or a dead end, I have enough other projects that can keep me moving forward, that until that one loosens up or is ready to move forward, I'm still being productive. And I'm never sitting around twiddling my thumbs, waiting for a door to open. I'm opening other doors. And then when a part of a creek catches a flow and you can ride the wave, you ride it and you go all the way. But that's how come some films get made and some end up as note cards over here that just aren't films. That these are all feature film ideas. None of them are getting made. I didn't even realize that until I was answering this question. And that's the reality of filmmaking. So you can pick your one thing, but you don't want to sink or swim on one. I'd say have some irons in the fire and see what you could be working on that all light your soul on fire and end up connecting with an audience that will cause someone to join you. So that's film funding. It's hard. It takes work. Don't promise everybody a bunch of stuff in crowdfunding where you end up making a second film of bonus features for 20 people who gave your last film. Make it thanks in the credits and move on, right? I mean, like that's, yeah. Call any of us if you want to know about film financing. We can go there. So let's go into just some more of these. Like, what do you know? Let's do camera work, right? So camera work, it could be nitty gritty, deep. It can be Google this camera. It could be nothing past if you want. What's something that you wish you would have known or that you would like to teach about camera work? Cassidy, and then Trey.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I just learned is that when you're working on something so independent, like like, because me, for most of the shoots, it's just me and my director of photography, and it was just us two going and doing everything. So you're going to have to wear a lot of hats. And so I'm not a cinematographer by trade, but like going through film school, I am dangerous enough with the camera to be able to make some shots. And so know your cameras and be willing and able to jump in if you can, especially when it comes to B-roll and certain things, because it can be really helpful when you only have a certain amount of shoot time or shoot days. And just having a good, at least a good knowledge of it, so that you don't have to be an expert, but you can, I think was helpful for me in going and shooting, because there were times I had to go by myself and do the whole interview and do the whole shoot. And I was thankful I knew at least enough about the camera to feel confident doing that.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. That was a brilliant answer. I don't handle a camera myself very often, and I consider myself lucky because I'm not very good at it.
No, I think that's a genius answer. And that was going to be my answer, is know what you're good at. And there are people in my life that are tech nerds, that are camera nerds. Like my friend Brett has held a camera his whole life. He always knows what's the next thing that got made. He always cares about what to shoot on, and he should be holding the camera. So I think it's okay for you to find your film family, maybe as a phrase, and who are the people that you travel with from film to film that you trust with your life and with the story. You develop a shorthand where you can just look at each other and go, and they will get and know what you're directing, and you can do something as a team that's better. But for me, camera, like you, Trey, I've given it up. I could do it. I can hold a camera and exist on a thing, because we all do at the beginning, Cassidy, like you end up doing everything. And therefore you end up 10 years from now, you'll be like, nah, I can't do it. It doesn't mean I should be doing it. So that's a great lesson. Find friends that are good at what they're good at and love to do. It might be the same answer for all these as we go, but audio recording audio on set. Do you have any tricks or tips or anything you learned?
No.
The non-sexy audio.
Audio's
Like,
hard. I think for me, the biggest challenge was sometimes we had to record in restaurants that people were there and going, and we didn't have the budget for a sound person. So I took sound classes in college, but I'm no expert, and so it was definitely hard. I'm very grateful to my sound designer. He was amazing and made it all sound okay. But it's hard. Just try to think about the surroundings, and because the sound is one of those things where you won't know why, but something will be off, and it's just one of those things that you don't think about, but it matters so much.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, try to part of that film family that you're building, try to find a great audio person, or do as much research on that individual as you can. It's really important. But there's a lot of things that you can fix in post, and I know that's a cliche, but in audio in particular, there's a lot of stuff you can fix.
Don't rely on that. Your audio guy will hate you if you're just like, oh, we can fix it in post. Like, try to think about it. But sometimes you just got to realize that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
That's great. I feel like a lesson for Doc 101, like early filmmakers, we would say a place to make your film stand out from people who are just starting are to have good audio and then good lighting. People who are bad at lighting, and we just like throw stuff up, and you've got to study 3-point lighting, and you've got to know how to use a window and how to use a sound board and place someone. And it's as simple to do audio as well. I would say, I've just got my iPhone. A lot of people have them. There are my ones from Rode that are $70. And they plug in here and they record on an app that's free, and you can put it in the person's pocket, not that pocket because you can see it. And you just clip a mic. And if you can learn watch a YouTube video how to sync audio, it's that easy. It's okay. We're recording. It's in their pocket. Let's do it. That having a little microphone on your subjects, and then you can walk. It's an iPhone in their pocket. It was very helpful for us, because if you can't hear a movie, you get a lot of credit on a documentary, more than a narrative if you can't hear. But if the audio recording is bad, then you're revealing your hand that you're an amateur or a beginner. So be able to see what we're seeing if we're meant to see it, and be able to hear what we're hearing if we're meant to hear it, are both very important things. So We got a submitted question, so we can all do a perfect timeout on best thing you've learned, and we're gonna ask. It's kind of about subjects and stuff. So I'll read it. It seems like they watched my film, and then we can ask the same question of all of you. So the question is, it seems like you all do a great job of connecting your viewer to the subject, and it's hard to watch them go through hard stuff sometimes or struggle. Right? In mine, it's relapse. How was it for you working with a subject that's hitting these huge stumbling blocks, especially if they're potentially fatal, like it can be in recovering? How hard was it not to get involved? So you guys think about that one for you and your film, and I can answer for mine because it's pretty straightforward. It's very hard. I think if you're a human being and you let yourself become in a relationship with people that are struggling at the level of life and death and relapse, for me, there were moments for me at the end of the movie where I thought about putting down the camera and helping and preventing them from suffering. And I really struggled and had a good crew film family of friends that were making the movie with me to talk through. When is it responsible to let someone suffer because they're a subject and you're filming a subject? Doc ethics, I'm not going to interfere. And when could someone get really hurt? And when could someone do something that is really bad for them health-wise or life-wise or drug use-wise? And I think that's something in our film that's about drug use, but never, spoiler alert, never shows anyone using drugs, because we thought that was part of humanizing people who are on the road of recovery, and not making it about a moment where it's like, oh my gosh, are they really snorting that? And it's like, no, like, you're going to know the human here. And if we also are seeing the best in them, then we can be real about struggle and really be there for them and know they could come to us if something was tough. But at some of the scenes, we just let them suffer like we weren't there. And I think in the end, they appreciated that. They knew we were there for them. They knew that we would interject if it's something we thought was going to become suicidal or recovery damaging. And I think in the end, they respected, as we showed the film to them, their families and people in recovery, to say, if a movie's too happy, it's fake in recovery. And if a movie's too sad, then it's exploitative. So how can you really walk that tightrope of, we laugh really hard one minute and cry really hard the next moment? So for us, that was it. If you can't do that, this movie shouldn't exist, right? You should just be friends with people and go hang out with someone. And that's a fine way to spend some of your life. But if you're going to make a film, you have to be willing to let people go through hard things and then also show that to the world. And that's kind of your role there. So for both of you, is anything to answer about tough moments with subjects in this film or any other film, or being with people during really hard roadblock, stumbling block moments as a filmmaker?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think with this film, the hardest part was watching people struggle and not feel like they could talk about it. There were a lot of restaurants, specifically in Flagstaff. We did a little section on this small town in Arizona, and there was a lot of these independent places really struggling with some of the legislation that was being passed, and it was making a lot of complications in their business. And I talked to so many people who are like, yeah, I'll talk to you off camera. It's great what you're doing. I hope it works out, but I'm not going to say anything because the last time I said something, I went from having a full dining room to being boycotted and having no one come in. And I can't afford that for my employees in my business. And it broke my heart to be like, this is the conversation we need to be having, yet like it's gotten so divisive that we're not able to have it. And I was just very grateful that some people were willing to talk to me and put their face on it eventually. And I think for me, it was just hard because like, I understand as an entrepreneur myself and a business owner, it's like, you have to look out for your business and for your employees. Yet, I really wanted to be able to share this thing that was going on and hopefully give them more space to talk about it without being villainized.
Yeah, I think like with any relationship that you have to know what your boundaries are. I mean, I think that's any healthy relationship, you've got to know what your boundaries are. And if you're working with somebody, they may not know what their boundaries are, but you've got to figure out what they are. They may not say it verbally, they may say it physically, they may say it over weeks, they may say it over months, they may say it over years, but you've got to have that antenna up and understand what people's boundaries are. I think that's just a really important part of the process.
That's right. All right, I've got 3 last topics. This is great. If you have any questions, you can submit them in the post. We'll answer them. I'm so excited to ask about editing. You're directors, you make movies. What is a lesson that you've learned about editing, or something that you think these Doc 101 people should know? What would you have to teach about editing?
I actually have a question.
Hit it.
That'll dovetail with that.
Get it.
So how do you two edit your films, and do you edit your films by doing paper cuts?
Great question. So paper cut, for people who aren't familiar, you would get all the footage that you have transcribed. So Cassidy talked about having the film written in advance. Then you have the film that's like the film that exists in your imagination. Then you have the film that you film. So it exists on a hard drive, but it's not edited from everything that you interviewed people, and you write that all out. And as an editor, you can go through and read everything that you actually have and kind of highlight and paper cut together a version of what the film should or could be. And then you can hand that off to an editor and have kind of a bare bones structure of the film that you want to have exist. So every project is different. On Clean Slate, we had 4 people or more following people in recovery at all times, and it was insane. We sat on hundreds of hours of footage, and a lot of which was just like building relationship and we would never use. And then it would have killed me to try and make it work. So I think what I did instead was, with an editor, we watched through the footage and pulled out all the stuff that felt genuine and was real. And it didn't matter whether it read good or not, was it delivered well or not? And not well like performance, well like letting me in. And what we discovered about one of our 2 main characters, Josh, is he's a filmmaker. So he had on a veneer. He had a different tone of voice when he was telling you a story or putting it on or showing you who you wanted to see. And it just felt kind of like, icky's too strong, but kind of fake. And as soon as we realized that if we just cut every second of footage with him like that, but kept all the real heart stuff, we cut 90% of what we had him filmed with. But the 10% is really good. And it's really honest and really inviting. So for us, we didn't use a paper edit on this film. I think it is very helpful to following a structure. But for this film, we had a 4.5-hour cut of the movie and had to cut it down to an 1.5 hours. So we had enough. We just wanted to stay focusing on the stuff that was transformational or palpable or real, something to hold on to. And I couldn't really read that as you would in a normal movie. So Cassidy, did you do paper edits on this one?
So I originally, because this came from a documentary writing course, I originally had a paper edit on the original interview, like just the sound interview that I did for this project in class. So I had this sort of template to jump off of. As far as when it went to the real interviews, I thought about doing a paper cut and trying to kind of cut it together, but I felt like I was so close to the subject matter that I wanted to kind of see what my editor saw and what stuck out to him and give him a chance to kind of string things together. And I had a lot of trust, and just kind of jumping to the editor question, get an editor. I went into this film the first day of shooting, and I started out doing filmmaking, doing editing. And so I love it. I think it's such a fun job to do, but I was playing in my mind of like, well, maybe I could edit it, kind of trying to think, oh, well,
oh no, she did it again. She's going to jump back in. She's got good answers. I want to hear her. I don't want to cut her off. Trey, do you have your idea going already for editing?
Yeah, I think.
Oh no.
Oh yeah, there she is.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I realized halfway through, I dropped, I don't know where I was, but yeah, the first day I went on the shoot, I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll edit this. And then after doing the first day, I was like, no. I'm going to hire an editor. I just don't have the space in my brain to do it all. And I found someone who was super awesome and who I trusted like 100%. And he was just really like great at being able to take all of the raw, put it together, and then we worked together sort of to finalize it and weave it together and move things around to make it full. So I did not have a paper edit on this one for the final film. I had something to jump off of and give me a structure of, okay, this is a story and where we want to go. But yeah, it is very helpful. It depends on what kind of movie you're making. Sometimes you don't have time to do it. If there's an urgency, you don't always have the time to do all that, but sometimes it can save you time too. It's trade-offs.
Yeah, I had 3 editors on The Fifth Man, and only because like my process is I do interviews. I make a full outline of before I even start shooting anything, so I have an idea of where my act 1, my midpoint of the film, the end of act 2, and then act 3. I kind of have an idea where things going, and then obviously that gets thrown in the trash. But what happens next is, once you do all the interviews or most of the interviews, that's when I actually take all of the transcriptions and I start going through it, and I pull lines and I start shaping my narrative act by act based off of that. And generally what I do is I work with sort of like a story editor. So I work with an editor who's going to help me shape the story, not so much pacing or style or recrees or, maybe some archival or VFX or, GFX or anything that's like that, but really get the story shaped. And then once you get the story and you've got everything kind of shaped, sometimes that takes 6 months, sometimes that takes 8 months, sometimes that takes a year. Then you pass it off to someone who like doesn't have an investment in your story the way you do. They could look at it objectively, and that to me really helps in having people who've been working on it for 6 or 8 months passing it off and giving it to 2 other editors who I have a team of editors I work with, and have them look at it, and they can go, okay, well, it's working here, it's not working here, it's not. And because you get blind once you've been editing something for like 8 months, 6 months, you get blind to sort of like it. So you really need somebody else to take a look at it objectively in a different way. And I think it really, really helps shape the story and find holes in it. And then you could go back in with a different kind of perspective from their perspective. And diversity is super important everywhere, but in particular in the edit. Like you've got to have so many different points of view, and it just makes your story so much better. I just think it's just so important to have diversity in the edit process. So that's just my, that's my point of view on it.
This is fantastic. I feel like there are 2 nuggets in both of what you said that are so good, amongst other stuff that's great, is the Cassie mentioned it, that the reason a paper edit can save you time. You said it like it was just a throw off. Is if you work on a film like this for so long and you come down to a deadline, and then that there's a line that they said that included this, this, and this. But if you have to search through 80 hours, 100 hours more of interviews, there's no chance you find it. You think you will, but then when you sat with someone for 8 interviews, there's no chance that you find it. But in a paper edit, I go onto Google Docs and type in the 4 words I know are in the sentence, and I know the tape, the minute, the second where that phrase is, and that's where it saves me. It costs me a ton of time up front on these films. I didn't do it on my first doc, and I wish I did. It'd be a 10% better movie. But now we do it. We pay an intern, or there's conversion things online to get it and then go through and proof it to make sure it's right. But it's worth it, because when you in the 11th hour can find the moment or 2 you want, it makes the film what you want it to be. And my lesson on editing, I think, Trey, it's exactly what you said. I would just take it a little differently, is I call it test editing or test screening to non-editors, is you're saying show it to people who don't know and already love your characters in the film. Invaluable. And I would say a huge thing that will make you go from amateur filmmaker to expert filmmaker is test screen your movie with test audiences. So find friends of friends. They don't know you. They don't know you've journeyed with the film. They don't like you and are saving your feelings. Buy them a coffee and donuts and stuff. Show the movie and tell them at the beginning, it's a rough cut. Things will change. I'm going to ask you some questions at the end. They watch the movie, and then I hand them a printed thing that has questions like, your 3 favorite scenes. What do you think this movie's about? 3 scenes you would cut. Is the time on it feel right or not? And then I rank out every scene in the whole movie, 1 through 5. What did you like it or not like it? And any thoughts about it? So things they forgot. You can then, when you take all that information together and see it, you can see what's happening emotionally to the audience. And it's not a 5, 4, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. That's not how you make a movie. But if there's a big section that's 1s and 2s and 1s and 2s, something's got to change in that section. And so then we change the movie, and 10 days later, screen it again and again and again. And you're going to discover so many things that you would never have had the guts to say about your own film. But when strangers are saying it in black and white type to you, and it says it over and over and over, it's worth fixing because someone's going to say it eventually. Better to keep them from thinking that about your film in the edit. So yeah, have tough skin, show it to people who will beat you up, and be willing to change it. If you don't change, you will die. That's a Trey Nelson quote. Okay, here's my last my two topics. Ready? Last two topics for today are score, and then we're gonna do festivals because we're at a festival and there's so much people don't teach you about festivaling. So if you know something, we'll teach you. So score, as a doc filmmaker, how did you pick what you picked? How did you use score? What's a lesson you can teach someone about scoring a film with music? Go for it. Yes.
So for me, I was a little hesitant to try to get like licensed music or like some sort of stock music to use to put in my film because I just didn't want to deal with like the legal ramifications of, copyright and whatever. So I made it a priority to leave some room in the budget for a score. And honestly, I found my person who did my score and my sound design from one of the restaurants I interviewed. They had a guy who did it and he was amazing. Yeah, Hans Dwight. He really was awesome and just created this beautiful score for us. So for me, that was sort of easier. I'm sure there's lots of ways, like networking, I think is the best way to kind of learn and see who might be good for what. And that's kind of how it helped me, even though it was outside of sort of the film world.
Yeah, I think it's really, I think scoring is hard. I think a lot of editors will tell you that they want some sort of library that they could work with when they're editing. So you've got to either, and also like I'm in the process of editing another feature right now, and we're trying to figure out the tone of the film through the music. So we're using a lot of music that's totally different than I'm comfortable using in a documentary. And it's very dramatic. It's very cinematic. You hear it rather than feel it. And I feel like, okay, well, I'm pushing the comfort zone of Trey's creative process. That's okay. But, I think that each film is a living, breathing thing, and you've got to. It's like I have two kids, so it's like you got to like let your kids be them, and your film's very much the same way. Your film's going to tell you what it is, and often it's going to tell you what it is through the music. So I always try to find the voice of the music with my editors, and yeah, it's a fun process, and you just be open. I think that's the biggest thing, is be open to trying to find that tone. I think like the hardest thing in filmmaking is finding the right tone, because if you get it wrong, your movie's not going to work. But if you get the right tone, generally people are going to be subconsciously open to accepting your film.
Oh, that's great. The score, you can't just pick the music that you like or the music that you're listening to now. I think it's seeing the film for what it is and what music helps usher the audience to the experience with the characters and the story that they need. And for Clean Slate, we picked a really young composer. His name's James Bishop. He's like 22, 23, 24. He has never scored a film before, but he's a savant. He's a genius. He's insane. He sees music. We pitched him with a producer at a bar, and he didn't touch his drink for 2.5 hours and talked without breathing about the subjects and their inner motivation and what might have happened with their parents, which caused this. And I was like, okay, write a score, man. So your thought of like editing a film to music is super helpful. But like Cassidy said, it is cheaper often to have an original score based on the level than it is to buy music that already exists. And if you edit to something where music already exists, it can be really helpful, like Trey's editors, and putting something together that pushes you and gives you a scaffolding to build a film around. But then if you get married to that scaffolding, you can go broke and not afford it, and it's not worth it. So build your film that stands by itself, then remove that score, use them or don't use them with a composer as temp tracks, and say, I like this song, but can you make it your own? And then have them know what you're trying to do and what's going on, and then usher in this new score. Plus, then instead of it being blanket, it can actually move with what you need it to do. And at 17 seconds, it can do this, and then it can pause for this line, but then it can end to this, and you can have these really well-crafted pieces that make your film 10 times, 100 times better because it's personable. So yeah, score is important. Use music or don't use it on purpose. So it was perfect time. We're going to hit festivals. Ask your questions if you have any other ones, but I would just be so curious about your festival experience. For a burgeoning filmmaker, what would you teach them about what festivals can be worth, or a trick or a tip that you wish you knew about getting your film into festivals or doing film festivals like the Portland Film Festival well?
So this is my first festival. I had a short that got into a festival a while back, but I wasn't able to go. But this is my first festival that I've actually gotten to participate in. And I think the biggest part is just trying to be involved. And I actually work on a production team for comedy festivals for stand-up stuff. And I think the people who get the best out of festivals, just from my experience, is people who show up and participate and network and take the time to get to know not only the industry that's there, the other filmmakers that are there, but the people who are running the festival, and be open to learning, because there's so much. I mean, I've learned so much from hearing both of you, but there's so much to be learned from what people have done before. So, and I think Portland Film Festival has been great about getting filmmakers connected and giving us opportunities to talk about our films. And I'm just very grateful for that.
Yeah, I think strategy in terms of like applying to film festivals has a lot to do with the budget that you have, right? Like festivals can be very, very expensive. If you're submitting to like 20 or 30, it can get really expensive. So I think know who your audience is. For instance, we made a film about a Long Island track coach, and we submitted the film to the Stony Brook Film Festival, which is on Long Island, and we were the opening night film for that film festival, the first documentary to be the opening night film in 30 something years at that festival. And it was it was in person, so it was extra special that way. We had 700 people in the theater. It was extraordinary. It was early in the summer, so things were different. But I would say that, like, the experience that you're gonna get out of a festival is gonna be based on, how much of yourself are you gonna offer to the festival yourself. Like, I think Portland has done an extraordinary job of giving us as filmmakers a voice. Often it's just our film that's the voice, right? It gives people an opportunity to see the people behind the film, and I'm really, really grateful for that. And I know that like directors don't like to be in front of the camera. I'm one of them, but I like to feel seen too. I like my voice to be felt and seen, just like everybody else. So I'm really, really grateful for that. And Portland's done an extraordinary job.
Well, this is so great. I wish we could do 2 hours on film festivals. I've got so much. So I'm going to tell you what your last thought is, and then I'll share mine. It's just your final thought. It'll be a goodbye, and anything else you wish you said in this recording, this podcast, this Q&A. So you get a final thought. But here's my festivals thing is every festival is different. Know what they do. So don't get in the illusion that being in a top tier 1 festival is going to change your life, because your odds of getting a film into some of those are like 0.07% to have a short film at a really famous festival in the winter. So know what it does. Be realistic about spending the money versus going. I think if it's all relational, same as we were talking about with a subject, same so is a film festival. And it's an honor when you get chosen to go. But if you get chosen to a really good film festival and never attend, then you're missing out on the relational connections that you can make with the staff, with the volunteers, with the other filmmakers, with the audiences. And I think the bus rides. I mean, I've met film festival directors on bus rides where we talk about what's the best thing you've seen at this festival. And now we're friends. And even if their film festival denies your films for years, it's all this relational thing. I'm not going away. I'm going to make films for another 30, 40 years, Lord willing, that make movies, that put them in the world. I'm not going to stop. So I'm not threatened that it didn't fit in your programming or it didn't resonate with you, or we're just not going to go away. And I think if you can hold what you make as important, but not precious, that it's going to get told no a lot, and that's okay, then I think that can be really refreshing for a programmer and a festival attendee and people that do that, because it's a very hard job. It's a great job, but if you watch 3 or 4 feature films a day for months, and you at the end decidedly needing to choose amongst your friends which of their babies you love and which of them you kill in the street, is honestly what it feels like to be a programmer. So if you could just be kind to people, it'll go a long way. And then watch a ton of movies, watch so many movies, and ask people about their movies, and you will learn, you will grow, you will be changed as a person. And in the end, that's all we have anyway. So apply to film festivals, ask questions of people who have done it, ask for their spreadsheets, offer to buy them off them. Because we know what festivals are open when, which ones give discounts to submit, which ones don't, why, who to ask, kind of even what they're about. And it can save you money up front to not submit to ones that aren't going to take you anyway. You save you time and money, and you save them time. So it's doing everybody a favor. So know what you're doing. Festivals can be cool if you go. So I'm going to say the thank yous, and you both say your final thoughts. My thank yous are: people who viewed this or viewed it late, you're the best. Thanks so much for supporting truly independent filmmaking. It is in forever climbing up a mountain, only to climb up another mountain. So we appreciate your support. If we make movies and nobody sees them, then what are we doing with our lives? Thank you to the Portland Film Festival, to the staff and the volunteers. Movies don't show without people doing the work that you do. So thank you so much. And to these 2 filmmakers, you need to see Tipless by Cassidy and The Fifth Man by Trey and Clean Slate by me, Jared. You should watch the trailer, no brainer. Watch a trailer and learn about it. Then see the movie. They're playing for the month at the Portland Film Festival, and share a link online, social, and tell people how much you loved it or hated it or loved it. Because either way, honestly, it works for us. So to talk about our movies in the world, and that would be great. So final thoughts from you, Cassidy, and then Trey, and then we'll wave goodbye. Final thought.
Yeah, so I have 2 quick things. I think the first one, building off the festivals, if you plan and know when to submit, you can save a lot of money submitting to early bird deadlines. And it's actually, I would think, more helpful, because they're one of the first you're seeing. It's not like, oh, we got to fill a spot and there's all these films. Like, you have more time to see your film and a bigger chance of standing out if you get in early. And the second thing, for anybody who is wanting to be a filmmaker, just go make something. I know that you can get really caught up in this idea of like consuming and seeing all these great things and feeling I'm never going to be able to do that. But like, everybody started out somewhere. And I mean, I can look at my film and say there's a million things I wish it could have been better or different. But what I'm grateful for is that we actually went and we made something and completed something. And I'm just proud of what we made for the team we had and the budget we had. And so I think if you can get in that mindset and just be willing to get your hands dirty, you're ahead of the crowd and so many sort of these aspiring filmmakers.
That was beautiful. You know, I don't have much to share. I think that I think as human beings and as filmmakers, you've got 2 jobs. Be a good person and pay attention. And that's it.
Well, that's up on behalf of the Portland Film Festival. It's a perfect way to end, to be a good person, to pay attention, and to make something. That's your Portland filmmakers of 2021 telling you to watch our movies and go make something. Thanks for your time. Appreciate you. Thanks for being here.